Welcome to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. In this segment, James and I talk about comparisons, whether they can help us move our career forward, and in what way. Hope you enjoy.
Pat,
Yes, James.
what the hell do you mean by comparisons? You've put this down as an idea.
Yeah.
Comparisons, are they real? Are they useful? Do they inspire or deflate?
Yeah.
And, what do you mean?
Well, at the time I wrote that, what I meant was when you see somebody in the same field as you having a great success, really killing it, or even just doing one thing not badly, not as badly as you do that thing. Is that moment where you have the thought, oh, wow, look how great so-and-so's book is doing? Is that a real moment? Or is that just your brain going, I'm a monkey and you haven't had a self-denigrating thought for some time? Now's a good time to shove that in your brain. So is it even real? Like, are comparisons in any way real? The fact being that we're all living completely different lives, even if we seem to have many things in common socioeconomically,
Mhm.
whatever, we don't know what the other person is living. So we cannot. So that's kind of what I mean by, is it real? Like, maybe the word is it valid to make any kind of comparison between yourself and somebody else?
Right. So one of the comparisons is so and so has written a successful book. Why haven't I?
Yeah.
Right.
Not why haven't I?
Now,
That's not
why?
a comparison.
It is a comparison.
No,
But
no, no, no.
oh, all
So
right, maybe I'm not getting it.
yeah, well, because it's probably a little bit fucked up. And also, maybe I'm going to just say this. It's
Go
not
for
an American way of looking at things.
it.
So and so just had a great book, full stop. And then not why haven't I, but how do I do a great book?
Mm, mm.
So there's
Okay.
kind of a slight difference. And then it's not even so much the book. It's like, how do I support the book in the way that they're supporting their book? Because I'm seeing their feed on social media or whatever. They've got 9 readings and,
Right.
they're on their second imprint. And I'm like, how do I do that? Like, so I'm comparing in a way, but I'm not saying why. I'm saying how.
Right. So it's how can I replicate what that person is doing in a
Yeah,
sense?
to
And
a
it
degree, yeah. Given all the differences in what we write and how we write and who it's for and all that stuff.
yeah, and so there's all this, stuff about if you want to be a happy person, do what happy people do. If you want to be a person with a successful book, do what a person with a successful book does.
Yeah, it's a bit of a blanket advice. Like, it
And
doesn't make sense to me.
well, in a sense, it does because what it's saying is what worked for that other person isn't necessarily going to work for you. And if you spend
Mhm.
all your time trying to try new systems and new processes, as much as we love to do that,
Yes.
that can get in the way and be a distraction.
Hmm.
And really, I think maybe what you're saying is that don't focus too much on that, right? I mean, it's nice to be able to learn. Like maybe somebody did something that really strikes you as that could work for me,
Hmm.
but live your own path and accept these are the ways that I do things, and this
Hmm.
is when it works, I do these things. Is
Yes. Okay. So part of that I agree with because you're paraphrasing. What I think is that I am not actually not saying anything because the first part of the question is comparisons. Are they real? That's what we just talked about. Next one, are they useful? So we kind of approached that. And the final one is, do they inspire or deflate? So I
right.
think we feel like they can be real in that we might feel differently about this, but they can be real in that they can show a roadmap to do one thing or the other. And in fact, what if the comparison is, the shoes on the other foot? Like, what if I'm looking at somebody who just torpedoed their own career? It's hard to do that as a writer because so much of what you do is private. But let's say you go on a racist rant or something at a read.
Well, yeah, I mean, more recently we've got Neil Gaiman who's gotten
Right.
himself.
And what if you sexually abuse people that you're in a position of power over? That's just my take on it. This is not by any means an invitation to be sued by Neil Gaiman's legal team.
Yeah, or anybody to do with the Trump administration.
Look on your face. If this was a visual podcast, I think the look on your face would have said it all right there.
Okay, would have summed it all up. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean, I see what you're saying, and we've talked about offline and online about the daily rituals of various artists and creatives, and
Yeah.
how intrigued we are by learning about how other people do it.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I get from that is recognizing that there's no one way.
Yes.
And
So,
so,
yeah.
go ahead, go
No,
ahead.
no, you go.
Well, and so, with this comparisons thing that you're bringing up, are they real? And I think my first, yeah, because we do it, right?
Hmm.
It's impossible not to,
Yeah.
especially if you, for example, go to a reading, or if you're a musician, you go to a show and you see somebody who's basically kind of you, right?
Mhm.
And they're up on the stage, they're the one doing the reading, they're the one achieving, and you're maybe in that moment feeling like, I'm not really achieving this way. What's the difference? What can I learn from them? What should I do?
Yeah.
And then you get into this mindset where I have to replicate somebody else's process,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So I mean, it is real, but is it helpful?
Uh, right. Are they useful is the next part, but I just want to circle back to, is it real? You know what I think, because you said we all do it. I think the fact is not everybody does it, but gifted underachievers, mid-level creatives do it. And I'm going to say probably successful creatives and people who want to be mid-level. But there is also stories you hear about somebody who does like folk art and they don't ever try to sell it and they've got thousands of pieces in their house or whatever when they die. And so they might not do the comparisons because they opt out of the trying to sell your shit
Mm,
aspect. Whereas if you are actively trying to make a living doing your art, comparison is kind of like doing, a survey of the landscape. Like if I'm selling widgets, how many widget sellers are there on my block? How are they doing it? What's working for them? What's not working for them? So I think you're right. We all do it if we're in this particular zone, you know?
right. Right. So you don't think really, high achieving, successful, gifted overachievers, they don't look at other people who are doing,
No, no, I think they do as well.
oh yeah,
Like
and I don't think,
anybody on that trajectory or who hopes to be on that trajectory or is way up on that trajectory, they got there by doing it. That's what I think. I think
yeah.
it is actually, in fact, real.
Yeah. Well, and I would wonder too, and I would imagine it depends on the person and that kind of thing, but people feeling threatened, like I've gotten to this place where I've got a successful book, I'm writing my other one, I've got the agent, I've got, a publisher, all that kind of stuff. Everything feels pretty locked down. And then you start looking around like who's the threat, right? What writer or whoever artist is going to come along and steal my lunch or cut into what I've managed to achieve. And maybe that's another form, maybe not so much of comparison, but,
Hmm.
anxiety.
Yeah, I don't know. Do writers actually have that? I can see it with actors because there's only so many roles, and there are probably 60 people who qualify for a soccer mom role. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
maybe you want to have your car doing donuts in the parking lot and taking out the soccer mom types as they come into the building so that
Yeah.
you're the only one who shows up for the audition. But with writers, I don't know how you can make that comparison, you know?
Well, there's only so many books that Random House are going to publish, right? Or is going to publish. And more immediately as a ghostwriter. So there's
Oh, I
this
see. Yeah.
this organization that I work with where you pitch for books is very
Yeah.
competitive.
Yeah.
And about a month ago, they put out an email saying, we're going to host this beginners workshop for ghostwriters to
Hmm.
bring more ghostwriters into the fold. And I'm like, what do you think? We
Yeah.
don't need more, we need less.
Yeah. Yeah. I see what
Um,
you're saying.
you
That's for
know,
paid work. I think so I do understand. Like when I see a novice editor charging the same amount I charge and
Mhm.
doing honestly quite a shit job. I do feel like, well, they should fuck off, but I don't consider that a creative, it's my day job. And for you, yes, you're writing a book, but it's also kind of outside the realm of will my art survive in the open market because you're getting paid to create it. Does
Hmm.
that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does.
Okay.
And so then we get into, are they useful? And I think we've kind of danced around that it's a bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah. I think they're actually useful if you take the emotion out of them. Like if you're not asking the why aren't I at that, why aren't I achieving that? They're useful because that is not a useful question. The why aren't I? I don't find that useful.
Hmm.
But how can I is useful, or how might I, or how did they, or where did they, any of that aspect of the question about making a comparison with somebody else, and then really drilling down and going, okay, well, if I'm really looking at that person as somebody to compare to about what's achievable, or even how not to tank your career. So, you wouldn't you wouldn't necessarily ask, Why didn't I get disgraced for screwing my nanny?" You would say, how do I not get disgraced for screwing my nanny? It's a two-sided coin. And we're not talking about anybody famous whose initials are NG, by the
That's
way.
a great example that, and I don't believe, Pat, you have had sex with your nanny yet.
If I had a nanny, she's invisible.
Or better yet, the way a reporter would phrase that question is, when did you stop having sex with your nanny?
People, come on. Don't believe a word James is sort of not really quite saying. Okay. So are they useful? I think they can be useful if you are not using them dangerously
Right, right.
for
Yeah,
yourself.
well, and that's what I think, recognizing there's a little bit of a risk because it can veer off into more of a why them, not me kind of woe, sort of woe is meism kind of thing, as opposed to taking an approach where you gain strength from it as opposed to anything else. And then there's another piece too, which, maybe you can think about, all right, this person has got their thing out there. What is blocking me? And I don't mean like, decision makers or gated opportunities or I have writer's block or artist block or anything like that, but just what are the things that I'm doing that are not helpful to what I want to achieve?
Exactly. And I can even give you an example in my own life. So I've written, I think, maybe six novels. The first four I never sent out because they were apprentice novels. Basically, I was learning how to write a novel by writing a novel, and I didn't study really. I went to night school courses and bought a bunch of books on how to write a novel. And
Mhm.
then I decided I was tired of writing bad novels, and I got an MFA, and I wrote the fifth novel, and I did send that out. I did get an agent. It did get submitted to the Big Five. What I realized by looking at the writers I actually see around me, like, because I started going to readings when my book came out so I could support and also learn, what to do, what not to do, to make a reading fun. I realized that my focus on the Big Five and on the New York publishing scene, New York slash London, because I also I asked for Bloomsbury to be pitched, was blinding me to the fact that the working writers I know who, or have seen or met, in passing, they'll do small local books. They don't have they are not aiming for a bestseller. They are actually writing the book they want to write, and whoever can publish it they'll get it published because they are not aiming they're a bigger fish in a smaller pond, which is kind of a shitty way to say they're just being smart. They're using the resources they have at hand. They're understanding that Canadian publishers are subsidized to some degree to publish Canadian writers, so they have a better chance. And then you get the first three books out and you have an easier time getting an agent and other stuff if they sell okay. So you got to flog them.
Yeah.
But so I had ignored that aspect until I realized it was there. I just didn't know about it?
Yeah. And there's a part of that, it reminds me, so in different shows, this has been represented a couple of times that I've seen pretty effectively. One is in Marvelous Miss Maisel when she goes oh gosh, I'm gonna forget everybody's name, but comedian of the 50s and 60s who's in that show. Oh God, this is embarrassing. But anyway, he has this big, huge show,
Uh-huh.
right? And she has decided she's only going to do, headlining gigs.
Okay.
And they have this scene where they're on the stage, it's empty, it's this big, huge, gigantic empty room. And she's
Mm,
having a dream of this is what I want to be. And he comes out and he says, "Why did you turn down this gig that I got for you?" And she goes,
mm.
"Because it's not a headliner and I'm only going to do this." And he goes, "No, do the fucking work,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Do the fucking work.
Yeah.
This is a job. You got to do it every day." And, I mean, it seems obvious and all that kind of stuff, but I take that kind of advice to heart because I
Hmm.
think that's the kind of hard love or hard truth that probably would get me going when I don't feel like going.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, do the fucking work,
Uh,
you know, get to work.
100%. 100% agree. And I would have loved to have been more aware of what I was thinking, but it was all subconscious. My focus on the big five was honestly partly just that my first viable full-length novel was uh, after I got the MFA program. The other four honestly were shit.
Really, you still believe? Have you gone back and looked? And
No, they were on floppy disks.
oh boy,
I don't even have them. They don't exist.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. But which is good kind of because now I can believe they were shit. I don't have to go read them. But the MFA programs, they really privilege the more high profile publishing stuff.
Yeah.
It's you kind of learn that, they did have a couple of workshops, well, not workshops, presentations, I guess, from faculty on
Mhm.
going with a mid-sized to small press. There are very few mid-sized presses left in North America, but the even the ones who said you should try this were saying because you're not going to make it the other way.
Wow.
There's a very good chance you might not make it the other way, and also that even if you make it, your book won't be supported. So you should try this. Not you should try this as like a stepping stone, or just as a good thing to do while you're building your portfolio of work, which I think it would have been tried by more people had they couched it that way. Because I honestly was still clueless when I left. It wasn't until I got the 3-day novel published and I started going to readings again, because I hadn't gone since before COVID, that I went, oh God, there's this really lively publishing scene that I just didn't really know about, actually, which is kind of embarrassing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there really is. And I'm thinking about our past interviews, and both Doug and Kath, have found not that big beauty pageant of, New York Times bestsellerdom kind of thing
Yeah.
in their domains, but they've found a really, really successful model that works for them.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so, well, I guess, one thing that I'm thinking then is the beauty contest, right?
Hmm.
We all in that comparisonness that we're
Yeah.
talking about, do we only see the beauty contest aspects of it, and that causes us to fail to see the nearer opportunities,
I believe
right?
it does. Yeah.
Or kind of see them as less than, like,
Yeah.
I want the big thing, so I'm not gonna take
Yeah.
this, you know.
So in my case, I was unaware of the nearer, potentially more achievable things, and that's completely just my own blindness. But for the beauty contest, as in the big success, the starring role versus, the supporting character, New York Times bestseller versus the big five versus a small press, whatever. I think it's possible for people to see those as, maybe morally better or qualitatively better, but my opinion is that they are not qualitatively, morally, objectively better than having a thriving uh current situation, because those can be in the future forever. Like
Mhm.
you can't really control how you get there unless you, as you say, do the work. And so in that way, I think comparisons are useful. If you're
Yeah.
doing a certain way of comparing and you're going, see, because I'm now comparing my potential for traditional publication, I'm comparing it to other local writers. I'm not comparing it to Sally Rooney or, John Banville or like that.
Yeah, and so update. to listeners, my brain is kicked into gear. The
Oh,
name I was looking for is Lenny Bruce.
Lenny
Anybody
Bruce.
had Lenny Bruce? But
You know who I
but
thought you
it,
meant?
well, no, go
Phyllis
what?
Diller. Phyllis Diller.
Phyllis Diller. Yeah, she was one.
Joan
Listen,
Rivers. Joan Rivers?
Joan
Yeah,
Rivers.
died on the
Everybody,
operating table.
yeah, and she said the same thing too. So that made me think, as you were talking about your local scene, how many people are in Vancouver? I mean, it's got a population that's over what, 20, 30 people?
Fuck you.
Do
It's it's
you
a
feel
Greater
like there's
Vancouver.
a light on your national identity?
Oh, Mr. Guy from Exeter, New Hampshire. Uh, Metro
Like,
Vancouver population in 2021 was 2.643 million.
all right. So if you, what
Sorry.
is 1% of that? That's a successful book. One data point that I heard is most books average about 2,000 copies. Like 1% of 2.7 million is
Oh, 1.1%. 1%. Okay, that's a good, interesting statistical thought.
that's a successful book.
Okay, then part three is do they inspire or deflate? I'm talking about if we turn back around to comparisons in the bigger picture and we agree that they're real, that, people who are on the fucking ladder do tend to compare, but not necessarily in a why aren't I their way. It's more like, for me anyway, it's more like, what are they doing differently? And what am I doing differently? And where can I learn something? And then do they inspire or deflate? I would say a little of both. A little of both.
Yeah.
Sometimes seeing somebody do something really well and you just did it 10 times sort of less well. It can be a little deflating and then it's over and you're like, well, so what?
Yeah, but sometimes that can be that motivation, right? So
Yeah.
I can't think of any like real specific instance off the top of my head, but I know that if I go and, for example, hypothetically hold a reading,
Hmm.
feel okay about it, and then I go and see somebody else do it, and wow, they really nailed it, right?
Yeah.
And they put in like all these ideas to really liven it up and really get people engaged. Then I'm gonna feel like, ah, shit, I kind of blew it. But at the same time, I'm gonna go, but I've also now got a lot of ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So let's take a different example, not so much a reading. What if you see somebody, all I can think of is reading related stuff and giveaways and shit like that, but I'm thinking
Okay.
actually something more in the creation of the work comparison, or how did they get their agent versus I'm still struggling, say, to get an agent.
Yeah.
So then you look at, and it was 100% who they knew. Like they got their work read because, and this is normal in publishing, right? It's who you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
really, it's also the quality of your work, but just getting it read can really be who you know. And
Mhm.
so you might see somebody who had the connections. Oh my God, I'm just thinking of somebody who spent a great deal of money on book coaching and going to conferences and making connections, and at the same time was writing their first novel and took a long time to write it. And some of those connections paid off. They did get asked for full manuscript, but haven't yet got an agent. So there's a measure of deflation in me thinking, man, I should have been making more connections. But now
Yeah.
that I think about it, I'm like, I'm gonna start making more connections, which is
There you go.
inspiring to me because I really like bullshitting with people at conferences. It's my happy place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So there is that legwork that you have to do if you want to get your art out,
Hmm.
right? So part of that in writing and probably everything else is you've got to make connections and build networks. And to do that, you've got to be out meeting people and you've got to be out doing things. And so that's part of the profession.
Yeah, I think so. And you can think of it as, I prefer to think of it because it's not quite building a platform. Platforms are different.
Right.
It's like participating in the community. And
Hmm.
I actually prefer to think of platform building as community building but it's just on a wider scale because whatever you're into writing or doing or acting or whatever, you're gonna have a community of people who are also into it that you can hang around with online or whatever that will eventually probably make a difference.
Right. And so when you put something out, and it's about doing that. You're trying to make connections, right?
Yeah. Okay, so what do you think? Have we answered all our questions
I
about comparisons?
I think it's like each one sort of a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, do they inspire or deflate? They can do either. Are they useful? I believe they can be, depending on how you use them
Yeah.
and how you
Yeah.
feel about them. Are they real? I would say for people in our position, they are real. They actually exist.
Mhm.
They're, and it's valid to compare.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would wonder, is there a specific way to title this type of comparison?
Yeah, maybe comparison is the wrong word.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily the wrong word, but it's like a creative to creative comparison or
Or what about evaluation?
yeah, or evaluation because I immediately went down the road of feeling like oh somebody, the woe is me kind of thing, but it's
Yeah.
really more what you're saying is about the learning.
Yeah, yeah. From my perspective, yeah, because I really feel like I made my own bed. I'm gonna lie in that thing. Like if I see somebody really killing it, I'm just like, well, it's like seeing somebody who didn't get divorced. I'm like, they made better choices. They lived a different life. How can you compare yourself to that?
Yeah, well, and you don't know what's going on
True.
behind the eyes too.
As we could expand that to be all comparisons, especially
Yeah.
including the ones we're talking about with other creative people in our fields. We don't
Yep.
know what it's actually like inside there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Gifted Underachievers, the podcast for mid-level creatives with delusional ambitions. Well, what do you think? Have comparisons helped you out as you move through your creative career? If so, we'd love to hear how. Send us an email to giftedunderachievers@substack.com or leave a note in the comments over on our Substack page. Until next time.